If there's one thing I love more than America, it's banks. So you can imagine how conflicted I felt earlier this year when the King of America, Donald Trump, started going after the King of America's central bank, Jerome Powell.
I don't like him. The Fed chairman's incompetent.
This guy is a numbskull.
We have a stupid person, frankly, at the Fed. He's done a bad job.
Do you believe that the president has the power to fire or demote you?
Not permitted under the law.
Not what?
Not permitted under the law.
So it might sound fun to watch the central bank get injected with enough drama to make Andy Cohen bust live in front of a studio audience. But some buzzkills say that this hissy fight could actually threaten to destabilize the global economy. So what's really at risk in this big bureaucratic bank beef? Today, we investigate. America's central bank, known by its stage name, the Federal Reserve, was created to protect our country from financial crises. You can think of it like a bank for banks. A real bank's bank, if you will. A bank that the banks go to when they want a bank. The main function of the Fed is to keep the economy steady and stable by controlling interest rates. When times are tough, the Fed lowers rates to try and make it cheaper for everyone to borrow money, speeding up the economy and increasing hiring. When things run too hot, too much money flowing around, creating price inflation, well, that's when the Fed raises interest rates, effectively shooting a tranquilizer darts directly into the flabby ass of the United States economy. The decision on how to adjust interest rates is made by the Federal Open Markets Committee. This is led by Fed Chair Jerome Powell, who was actually appointed by President Trump in his first term. These guys make their decisions without any input from voters or government officials. In other words, the Fed is designed to be independent. As you can see, the Fed Hot Chili Peppers play a crucial calculating role in our country's long-term financial planning. They alone get to decide when to raise or lower interest rates, one of the single most powerful policy tools wielded by anybody in the government, a tool that it sure seems like the current president would prefer to wield for himself. No, there are many differences between our current central bank and the one first devised by Lin-Manuel Miranda, the 18th century. The core idea remains the same. In order for the central bank to serve the long-term economic interests of the United States, it has to be independent from politicians whose interests are inherently short-term. And yet President Trump has taken his indefatigable gamma ray of rage and pointed it directly at the Fed's political independence. Just in the past few months, President Trump has threatened to fire Jerome Powell over an over-budget renovation project. He's battling in court to remove Fed Governor Lisa Cook over flimsy mortgage fraud allegations, and he appointed his own Council of Economic Advisors Chair Stephen Miron as an interim Fed governor. Now, apparently, none of this shit has ever been done by a sitting president ever before, but Trump's done it all while making clear he wants those COVID-era high interest rates lowered, which he insists will thrust the economy into high gear.
There's things that you can do that will be like a sugar high, where you can feed the economy a short-term interest rate that will make things much better for a short period of time.
Anil Kashyap is an economist and professor at the University of Chicago's Booth School of Business. In September, Anil twinned up with Citadel CEO, 33rd richest man in the world, and billionaire Trump donor Ken Griffin to write an op-ed saying that Trump's interference in the Fed could have serious economic consequences.
I got to the point where I thought, the administration had crossed a line. There's got to be a line in the sand here that just says, no mas. You guys don't burn down 50 years of investment in trying to have a good central bank just to try to, win the next 2 months worth of growth.
What Anil's saying here is that investors and business folk love the Fed because of its credibility. The belief that the central bank can use its powers to tame inflation allows people to feel safe investing their money in the United States. Anil told me that the last time the U.S. lost that credibility was during a little time called 50 years ago, when our last fun president, Richard Nixon, tried his own pressure campaign on the Fed, marking the worst thing Nixon ever tried to do.
So in the 1970s, President Nixon threatened the chairman of the Fed by trying to embarrass him to say, you're going to cut interest rates so I can get reelected. Exactly the kind of thing that we're worried about. The Fed caved in and did it. That set off a bout of inflation.
And Trump's pressure campaign is so bad, then why have our markets been at all-time highs? I mean, just in the past few years, political influence in Turkey and Argentina's central banks have created inflation and market turmoil out the wazoo, which I think is Turkish and Argentinian for shit economy.
I am surprised there has not been more of an impact on longer-term interest rates, that people haven't said, wow, the risk that inflation really gets out of hand and we have a repeat of the 1970s is materially higher now than it was.
So that's the question, is like, why has the bond market been pretty calm and not reactive to all these efforts?
Sam Goldfarb is in the office phone booth behind me, as well as a markets reporter for the Wall Street Journal with hefty bond market experience. Government bonds are basically when you loan money to the U.S. government, which they promise to pay back at a future date with interest. When bond investors expect inflation, they demand higher payouts to make up for it, so the return on the bonds goes up. It's why people usually look to the bond market for signs of inflation fears. But throughout all this chatter that threats to Fed independence would stoke inflation, the bond market didn't really move. So it seems like folks aren't expecting all this hullabaloo to actually amount to anything.
Basically, bond investors are just doing the math and saying it's like it would be hard for Trump to get a majority in the near term. And then on top of that, if investors were worried that the Fed really had lost its independence and was going to, lower interest rates a lot, they would be worried about inflation. Bond prices would go down, interest rates would go up, and then Trump would not get what he wanted, which is lower interest rates. so it's like, so they think that they don't think that someone would be that irrational. Their expectation is that even if Trump were to get, loyalists on the Fed, that they would sort of be forced by the market and by the economic realities to be at least semi-rational.
Now, I wasn't listening to anything that Sam just said, but my assistant tells me that Sam's basically saying that bond investors are betting that all this political pressure campaigning and talk of firing right now is Trump just saying shit, but that is still just a bet. I mean, what if he does truly do something to permanently alter the relationship between the Federal Reserve and the White House? Looking ahead, Jerome Powell's term is up in May, opening the door for Trump to appoint someone more loyal to him as chair of the Federal Reserve.
You'd like to have somebody that kind of understands the job, that's going to weigh all the evidence, isn't going to be calling the White House every Friday and say, what do I do next week, boss? That's not what we want, and not what's going to serve the public best. So everything Mr. Trump has done in terms of appointing loyalists throughout the government suggests that he's going to try to find somebody that's more malleable than Chair Powell has been. And I think that won't end well.
Indeed, it sounds like that's a future we should do our best to avoid, Anil. And despite markets not being too flustered over Trump's maligning, it does seem like come May, Trump will have the opportunity to appoint someone who'll just do whatever he says. And given everything I've learned throughout this program on just how important it is to maintain a central bank that's independent from political influence, well, it seems like I have no other choice but to do the right thing and offer up my services.